Well, good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll just go over kind of a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started with today's presentation. First of all, I just want to thank our sponsors for this series, which would be the Small Business Development Centers, the Small Business Administration, the Montana Department of Commerce, Montana State University Extension, Montana Economic Development Association, the Grow Great Falls Economic Development Group, and the University of Montana. So those organizations all kind of combine to help bring this series to you at no cost. A couple other things I want to point out. We do record all of these sessions each month, and we do post them on our website. So if you'd like to go back and review one of the past month's sessions, those are available at the same website that you logged in from today. So, and then we do try to take them down when they do get outdated. So you will see that there's probably only about 2 years or so worth of webinars, just because sometimes the material does get outdated and not current or not accurate. So then we will take them down after a while. So those are out there as a resource for you, or if you want to share them with someone that wasn't able to attend, or if you missed one, you can watch that yourself. And then I also want you to mark your calendars for our June session, which will be on June 3rd at 11 o'clock. So again, a Thursday at 11 for that one. And we're going to have Rich Gannon from the Great Falls Economic Development Authority. And Rich is going to talk next month about reducing payment friction and selling on your website. So mark your calendars for next month's session as well. Now for today's session, let me introduce our speaker. Tara Mastell is going to be our presenter here today, and she's someone who's worn a variety of different hats for MSU Extension over the years. She started out as a county-based faculty member in Jefferson County, also working with, I believe, Madison County, and kind of a collaborative arrangement there, working a lot on community development issues. And then she moved to the local government center for MSU Extension on campus, which I think you see that logo there on the front page, and then recently has also transitioned to take on the leadership for our community development group within MSU Extension as well. So Tara's going to talk to us a little bit about having different generations in the workforce. And I can't remember how many years, maybe 10 years ago, we had a speaker kind of on this topic at an annual conference for MSU Extension. And it's really an interesting topic, one that hadn't really crossed my mind until it was brought up in front of me. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tara and encourage everyone to ask questions via the chat window while Tara's presenting. And then at the end, we'll certainly invite you to unmute and ask questions verbally as well. So with that, Tara, the floor is yours.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Joel. That's a great introduction. Yes, happy to be here today. I see a couple of folks that I know in attendance today, so glad to have you all. Generations in the workforce, generations in the community is definitely one of my favorite topics to talk about because it helps. We've got a lot going on right now. We've got a lot of people talking about this issue. So in our communities in Montana and across the country, we're seeing some folks that have been longtime people owning businesses, volunteering in the communities, and being there, and they're wanting to step back a little bit. And the people that are coming up behind them, they do things a little bit differently, and that causes a little challenge sometimes. So I think it's helpful to take a look at these generations and how did each of these generations, how did we get to be the way we are? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And a little bit more about my experience. I started out my career in marketing research for a national advertising firm. And then I worked in economic development in Whitehall for Extension. So I've definitely got that that business background, and I think that's relevant to this today. So I'm just going to, here we go. So let's just talk a little bit first about who are we talking about here with regard to generations. Right now is a very unique time in history. We have five generations in the workforce. We've never had that before. People just haven't had those long lives before. So we have a few folks starting at the bottom here, of the silent generation in the workforce. And then we've got baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and the Gen Z it's got a lot of different names yet. The newest generation to graduate from high school and graduate from college. They're just entering the workforce. This data here on these slides is from the Pew Research Center, and this is the most recent data that they have. It's from 2017, so it's a few years old, but it does have some interesting things to say. So if you look at this chart on 1994, so a little over 25 years ago, the baby boomer generation was half of our workforce. So, and then millennial or Gen Xers were just 29%. So in 2017, that's really changed, where the baby boomers have split by half. So now at that point, there are only 25%, and certainly that's gone down. And if you look at the millennials, even in 2017, they were the largest generation in the workforce, 35%. This is another way to look at it. So this is looking at millions of workers. So you can see across the top, the boomers have slowly gone down in their size of part of the workforce, and the millennials have just soared right up there, and they are the largest part of the workforce at 56 million. And this is again from 2017. So take that into consideration. So we've looked at the generations, like who we've got. We've got 5 generations, and I think generations does play an important part of kind of who we are and how we interact in the workplace. However, I would put forward that generations is just one part of who we are. I think it's an important part, but it's not the only thing. So we also have personality, our gender, our birth order. Are we that responsible oldest kid? What's our conflict style? How do we manage? What's our leadership style? What kind of environment were we raised in? So I just want to talk a little bit about each of the generations and how they came to be. And I will just go through this fairly quickly here. So starting with the traditionalists. If you think about the life that these folks have lived, they know the Great Depression from the 30s. They know the Dust Bowl, out of work, out of money, out of food. This generation had a fair amount of adversity. They were around when Social Security came to be, and they were there when they knew why, because there wasn't the security and then the bringing about of that policy. They witnessed the great urbanization when these folks were young. Our country was very ag-based. Very much people were living on the farm, on the ranch, in the country, and during their lifetime, they saw this great migration into more urban areas. They, of course, were there for the World War II, Korean War, and they just have these common values of sacrifice, dedication, loyalty, productivity, patriotism, a strong appreciation for history. So this generation learned right from wrong, manners, courtesy, proper behavior from family members who modeled what they taught. So there's there's right and wrong, there's rules, there's protocol, and very strong work ethic, productivity. So this generation is this is very unique to this generation. So I mean, we all have some of these qualities, but this is, the generalization for this group. All right, so I'm going to move forward to baby boomers. You can't really see this, but it says, have you given much thought to what kind of job you want after you retire? So boomers are, they had a huge impact on our country. So some of the common influences that boomers had was they have always known the US to be very much a world power. They experienced this mass production because there was such a baby boom. There were so many of them that came about so fast that they were there to experience these factories mass producing cars, appliances. They also experienced this transition to urban areas, and they no suburbia. There wasn't really that before the baby boomers came around. They lived through the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War protests, and the war itself. There wasn't television when they were young, and then all of a sudden they had that too. So they're known for burning, this generation, not all of them, of course, with the protests of the war and then peace, love, that sort of thing. Common values for this generation are known to be optimism. I mean, when they were growing up, I mean, it was just sky's the limit. The economy was growing and developing and just such optimism for them. So everything was just getting better and better all the time. So they have when we do this in person, baby boomers are just like they had such a great youth, great childhood. It was just a wonderful time for them. They're interested in fairness, recognition, personal gratification, personal growth. There really weren't these sort of personal growth books, and this whole genre has grown up after the baby boom generation has really popularized it. They are known for a high divorce rate as well. Some of the TV shows that were popular, because media really does influence. I think it reflects, but it also influences us. The two on the bottom, Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver, if you think about that, the way that these kids were baby boomer kids, when they were growing up, these kids, like they got into situations at home, messing around or whatever they were doing during the day. But when dad came home at night, dad was the rule. Like what he said was it, and there was no question. And so it's just a very different way that we're living nowadays. But this is the way that baby boomers were raised, and I mean overall. So fast forwarding to Gen X. Some of the common influencers for Gen X are that they're the latchkey kids. These kids, their moms were working more than any other generation. So they a lot of times had to walk home from school, have a key, get in the house, and then during this time, we were very aware of our stranger danger. It was just some of the kids were getting stolen around the country. You remember having pictures of kids on milk cartons. So this time for this generation growing up, it was just really, you were on your own. You had to be very independent and self-sufficient and make sure that you were safe. And they played alone because sometimes they didn't have a parent there to organize a play date or make sure it was safe to go outside. And then we had the AIDS pandemic. So even in your most intimate relationships, even then you might not be safe. So it's very much being aware of safety and security. We had MTV, so music videos came about. They weren't in existence before, but this generation saw the first ones. We saw a lot of our leadership fall from grace in not very pleasant situations. And we had an economic crisis here in the 80s and the early 90s as well. This group had very much difficulty finding a job upon graduation. The economy was so bad. Some of our TVs and movies. So there was so much fear and so much, there was the threat of nuclear war at any time against the Russians. There was just a lot of fear of the stranger danger and AIDS and everything. So the media reflected that. We saw a lot of Amityville Horror, Poltergeist, horror shows were just huge at this time. And I think people were just fascinated by risk and fear and that sort of thing. Common values for this group tend to be more independence because that's kind of how they've always lived. They've always kind of been on their own with the moms not being there with the plate of cookies after school as much as past generations. And so you had to be competent as well because you were kind of on your own. Self-preservation, flexible, skepticism because of the fall from grace that they saw. And this generation, raised mostly by baby boomers who worked really hard and were very committed, this generation tried to have more work-life balance. Okay, now let's talk about millennials. So I guess I just want to say back looking at this slide. So I initially I had a different picture on here and it was a little derogatory. And one of my colleagues, Ashley Kent, who is a proud millennial, she said, you know, that is kind of hurts my feelings. And I was like, oh my gosh, millennials have really been hit hard with a negative opinion about them, and I really feel bad for them. If you look at the millennials right now, I mean, these folks are the ones that are buying houses right now. They have kids. They're in their late 20s and 30s. They have mortgages. These are the ones that have the kids in elementary school probably now, or just or babies. So they are the largest part of our workforce right now. So I think we need to take another look and maybe be a little bit more kinder to our millennials because they get a bad rap, but they really are a really interesting generation. Have had some great experiences. So some of the things that have influenced millennials, the 9/11 tragedy, that is all they've known. They were young when this happened, and that is how they've known the world, is that something terrible like the 9/11 tragedy is a reality. It's a real possibility. They lived through Katrina, the tsunami in Thailand, and the Columbine shootings. These are all happened when they were young and very impressionable. Of course, they've always known the internet, almost always. Social media has been always there. This generation is really characterized by having been raised by helicopter parents. And I do think that that plays a lot in how this generation interacts with the world. And I always like to say that, you know, you're a product of your parents. You can't tell your parents how things are. If you're raised by a helicopter parent, that's how you know the world. And it's really not your fault as a human. It's how you were raised. So this group did know the economic prosperity of the 90s, but then they were hit hard by the 2008 recession, and they really felt that because their families felt that, and maybe not so much in Montana, but in other places it was really hit hard. So this group also had a very strong push to go to college. This group was really like, college is the best. You got to go to college. And so they were really pushed hard to go to college, and to the detriment of their economic future, really, at times, because they maybe college was not for them and they got into a lot of debt because of college, but it was like the social push at the time to go to college. And this group also has some of the lowest wages, but have experienced the highest cost of living. So they are really in a financial pinch. So this picture shows images of like teamwork. So the millennials were raised in this culture of teamwork. Everything was a group project, and we all had to always work together. And it's just the environment that they were raised in. Participation ribbons were a big thing, and a lot of people don't really like that idea. However, I would argue that that wasn't the choice of these millennials. That was what was given to them. They didn't have really a say in that, but I think that they do get a bad rap for that, but I do think that it's like, I don't know, I don't know that it's maybe perceived by them as it might be for other generations. This picture in the side here of this gal working on, she's got a desktop, a laptop, she's got her phone, and maybe an iPad there. Multitasking is something that this group has always done, and they are actually quite good at it. It's just normal. It's the norm for them. For other generations, it may not be the norm, but for this generation, it absolutely is. This generation grew up with Harry Potter, Britney Spears, MySpace. So this is the world that they grew up in. This is all they know. Common values. So also, this group is really known for following their passion, for multitasking, as we said before, having a strong sense of collaboration, because that is very much the trend in education as they were going through school, as group projects. High achievement orientation, strong networking, and this group took work-life balance to the next level. I think the Gen X tried to do work-life balance, but this generation, it's really more of a non-negotiable. Okay, so let's talk about this last generation that is just graduating from high school, just graduating from college, entering the workforce. There's a lot of different names for them: post-millennial, Gen Z, iGen. So the interesting thing about this generation is that they have had a lot of financial hardship, and even now with the pandemic, it's going to be even, they've had even more financial hardship. So the common thread is drawn commonly between this generation and the greatest generation that we talked about first out of the bat. So because of their strong familiarity with economic hardship, and they've had global conflict and the safety that they've always been concerned about. So this group is known to be more scrappy, more traditional values, and hardworking. So I think it's going to be an interesting generation to watch as they grow older, and they are the largest generation at 90 million. So they've always known global conflict. So they really have almost always known having an iPhone, a smartphone. The iPhone launched in 2007 when these folks were just babies. Really, these folks are always, always, always using media, like at all times of the day, almost constantly throughout the day. They're either listening to music, watching YouTube, on their phone, looking at social media. They are just really almost every hour of the day, they are using media. Another thing that's really interesting about this generation, and I think this is really going to be a challenge for us in Montana, is this generation across the country is the majority of this generation is non-white. So I think for us in Montana, I think that's going to be really interesting to watch as we go forward, because we don't have that kind of racial diversity in Montana. And so the fact that this generation is majority non-white is going to really impact the national media and the movies that we see and the everything. But that's not going to be reflected in our community as much. So I think that might be an interesting thing to watch as we go forward. So some common values of this youngest generation right now, they are discussing and engaging is just how they know the world to be. They just have, throughout their education, they have been asked, what is your opinion? And to be asked to discuss it. And so when you're in the workplace with these folks, they're not going to be, generally, they're not going to be, it's not in their culture, it's not in their experience to be just told what to do and take that and go with it. They are more likely to want to discuss it with you and engage with you and just talk about it. That is the norm for them. That is all they've really known growing up in their education and even with their families. So this group is also known to socialize less. They don't just go out and socialize as much as previous generations, probably because of the social media. They tend to be more pessimistic because they have experienced some hard times. Like I said before, the traditional values of success, money, and education is something that they hold in common with this, the oldest generation in the workforce. Equality is really a non-negotiable. This is another thing that they have really grown up with their whole lives. It's not a negotiable thing. It's just, equality is just an essential part of their values. They're quite entrepreneurial. They're looking to get ahead, motivated by passion similar to the millennials, but maybe even more. Very concerned about safety because that's, again, it's just become much more of a standard thing for them. So this youngest generation, they are still young, so we don't know exactly what they're going to be like, but they're huge. It's 90 million. So that's almost twice the size of the other generations that are in the workforce. If you look at in that 2017, where millennials were at 54 million. So it's a very large generation. They are still developing their characteristics. So I would say, I've just heard this just so commonly that people have challenges with this youngest generation. I would just ask you to think about, it's just such a large generation. I don't know how realistic it is for them to revert back to values that are held by previous generations, because that's just not the experience that they held. It's just something to think about. Another thing to think about is maybe it's not the generation, maybe it's the age. So if you look at these these magazine covers, so every generation when they were in their 20s got slammed by being kind of all about me. In the New Yorker, I think that's in the 60s, the me decade. So the baby boomers were getting flack for being all about them. And then we've got the video generation, that's Gen X, all focusing on themselves. The millennials in the Time magazine in the center, just taking all the selfies and just being about me. I mean, these are all 20 something, 20 something people. So I guess my argument is maybe it's not the generation in particular, but maybe it's just the age. You're in your 20s and you're trying to figure out what's your life's going to be like, finding a mate, finding a career. You're just really looking out for yourself and trying to set yourself up for the rest of your life. So just something for you to think about. And that's really all I have for you today. Does anybody have any comments or questions or thoughts about the ideas that I shared with you today?
Tara, we've had 3 questions come in directly to me, and I'm going to ask 2 of them together because I think they're related.
Great.
So the first one is, as a business owner, is it better to have teams that are all of a similar generation? Or is it better to mix generations between the two? So that's kind of question 1. And question 2 is, do you have any resources to help bridge the gap between generations?
Yes. Well, yeah, so that's great. A great question. So my colleague Ashley Kent, who is the millennial that I told you about, and she and I have talked about generations with groups before. So she talks about having a mentor, but not necessarily. So having a mentor or a mentee that's younger, like if you're in an older generation, finding somebody that's in a younger generation and having a specific intentional relationship with them about like, hey, I want to work with you and learn what you know, and then I can share, like a collaborative sharing relationship. So I would say that it would be better to have well, in the long run, to have teams that do have folks from different generations in there, because then they can, just to be intentional though, that you can learn from each other and learn the skills and the knowledge and understanding across generations, and take the good from all the generations, because they all have really great qualities and aspects. As far as resources regarding working with other generations, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I can take a look and find some stuff and send it out. Happy to do that.
All right, and we had another question came in, which was related to the first one I had. So another 2-question one here. So the first question of the 2 is, can you address the communication styles of the different groups? And the one that had come in previously was, I had heard the different groups communicate differently.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to make the different generations communicate better?
Yeah, well, yes. So I guess I didn't really talk about that, but yeah, so I've done this a ton of times. We do generations, fairly regularly. And that is one thing that is often talked about. And it's not actually the communication style, I would say, does not necessarily, you're not just pegged because you're a Gen X or a boomer or whatever, that you're going to want to communicate in one way or another. I think it's helpful to know preferences on an individual basis on how to communicate. So like I know plenty of boomers that do not want to talk on the phone or Gen Xers that do not want to talk on the phone. I guess so the older you are, in age wise, then you're more likely to be wanting to talk in person because that might be how you grew up, or how you think is the most respectful way to talk on the phone or communicate with somebody. So I think it's just another thing that we do recommend folks do is just to talk about it. Like if you're working inside of an organization, what is the best way to communicate? If you're gonna, if it's urgent, send a text. If it's important but not really urgent, send an email. If it's really, really urgent, make a phone call. I think you can have those discussions about what is the protocol for our organization. I mean, those are hard conversations to have sometimes, but I think you do have to kind of address it if it is an area of conflict.
All right, thank you. And we've had another question come in. And after this, I'll invite anybody that wants to unmute. They can ask questions that way or keep sending them in via the chat. But the question is, do you think it's important to point out the strengths that each age can bring to the team for a better understanding and appreciation?
I absolutely do. Yeah, I would say absolutely, because, you know, you're raised a certain way, you think that's the right way. And then you bump into people that are from a different generation. They have learned things differently. So I think just acknowledging that and just acknowledging that each generation has its strengths and the good things that it can bring to the party or to the workplace, and really capitalize on that. For somebody that's in the iGen or the millennial, like they have a different experience, and that's really valuable that they can share up with the folks that are in the older generations and vice versa. So the older folks can maybe share how their generation sees things and explain it a little bit thoroughly. But you need to, everybody, no matter what generation you're coming from, you want to be respected and you want to be appreciated for what you bring to the team. So I think that's the number one thing, is to just be curious and to be respectful, and to just show that you are interested and that you care. Because I mean, I think you ask any millennial and they will tell you that, yeah, they have gotten maligned in one way or another. And it's just not a great way to treat our coworkers, So I think we need to be respectful of all generations and of all the things that they bring. Yeah, curious.
All right. Thank you, Tara. And now I'll invite anybody, if you want to unmute and ask a question or put one in the chat window. We'll pause now to see if anybody has any additional questions. All right, well, not seeing any more questions. Tara, do you have any final comments you want to leave us with?
No, thanks for the engaging questions. I appreciate that.
Can I have a quick question? When you're dealing with multiple generations and the expectations sometimes are different than what they're producing, what is the best way to approach someone who maybe consistently doesn't show up for work, or they think you're giving them too much in one day to do, or we need people in the workforce. We don't want to turn them off. But on the other hand, there are, certain productivity that we expect. So what is the best way to approach people in different generations?
Well, I mean, the thing that comes to mind is to say, just to ask for ideas. Like, okay, here's the productivity that we need to have. So what's the best way for us to get to this level of productivity? And just ask their ideas, because I mean, if you're talking about somebody in a younger generation, that is definitely how they have come through the education system, and they've just always been asked their ideas. They almost expect to be asked their thoughts and their ideas. So if that is one idea, to ask them, like, here's what we need, based on the needs of the company, the productivity needs that we have are right here. And here are the resources that we have. How can we reach this level of productivity? What do you think about that?
Thank you. That's a great place to start.
Thanks for the question. That's a good one. Very good one. I've also heard that sometimes a little bit more direction might be useful. So I don't know if it's like I said, generations, it's just one piece of the pie. We are all made up of a lot of different influences. So generation is one thing.
All right, and thank you for that question. Are there other questions? All right, well, let me take a moment here to thank Tara for being our guest presenter here this week. I always enjoy hearing the information about generations and then trying to think about how that applies to my coworkers and clients and the people I interact with. So, and then for those of you that haven't already done so, again, mark your calendars for June 3rd, and we will have Rich Gannon from the Great Falls Economic Development Authority, and he's going to talk about reducing payment friction and selling through your website. So mark your calendars for next month's edition as well. So with that, thank you again, Tara, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.